This is the state of the nation. Irifa Mwanga. We are deliberate, we are reasonable, we are uncensored. The state of the nation with Henry Salah. All right, guys. How are you doing? It's been a while. I'm excited to be back. I'm excited to be back. Right. Is everyone excited to be back? Julia, Susan, Ingeniola, Nyoleng, Tony. Is everyone to be back?
Of course, Henry.
Yeah.
It looks like we've been on a break for almost a year.
The entire summer. We were on a break for the entire summer. But I'm excited to be back, folks. Before we start, as always, I'm going to start with the land acknowledgement. So we wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto African Alumni Association operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across the Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. I hope one day we shall have the courage to recite such acknowledgements in Uganda, where we have several Indigenous communities. Of course, the conversation today is in regard to whether Ugandans are ready, or Uganda as a country, whether Uganda as a country is ripe for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And many people might be asking themselves, what does he mean? What do they mean when they talk about Truth and Reconciliation? Do we need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Uganda? And the answer to that seems to be, yes, we do. Because if you have been following the events in the past couple of weeks, since the passing of the General Eli Tumwine, of course, many people have unfortunately celebrated his death. That is not in our culture, not just as Ugandans, but also as a Baganda people. And I say Baganda because many people think that it's been the Baganda celebrating General Eli Tumwine's passing. I do want to commiserate with his family, but I also want us to have this conversation genuinely. This year we have lost many important people in our country. We lost the Governor Bank of Uganda. We lost the Speaker of Parliament. We have lost a few other generals or very important people within the Ugandan community. And most recently, we lost General Eli Tumwine. And the common denominator among all these important people is that they mostly died in hospitals abroad. The governor, the former governor of Bank of Uganda, died in Nairobi. The speaker died in the US. General Eli Tumwine also died in Nairobi. And these are people who have been serving a government that liberated Uganda over 36 years ago. And of course, we think that being in power for over 3 decades, they would have the power to build the infrastructure where Ugandans can actually enjoy the healthcare services that are sufficient to take care of Ugandans, especially people in the caliber of General Eli Tumwine. Unfortunately, we seem to be losing most of our elites in the diaspora, in hospitals in the diaspora. What is very important in the most recent death is that some people actually came out to celebrate the death of General Eli Tumwine. Some people have come out to say that most of the people who celebrated were Baganda, which I disagree with as a Muganda myself. I think there were some people who might have inappropriately gotten excited about his passing, given his record, both as a general, but also as a Ugandan who has been very proud of having been one of the 27 initiators of the Freedom Project. We all know that General Eli Tumwine was the first guy to shoot at Magamaga Barracks, of course, officially starting the war that later became the Liberation War. So I'm not going to waste a lot of time. I have a couple of very eloquent and learned people in the studio here with me today. A younger adult, and of course, two young adults and two grown men. Myself and my friend, Mr. Mitala. All right, so we are going to discuss: is it right for Uganda to have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission? And I ask that question deliberately because ever since the Liberation War, we have never had this conversation. When you look at countries like South Africa, they had a conversation after the apartheid regime. They had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. When you look at countries like Canada, for example, we recently had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in regard to the First Nations people and how they should be treated, some of the wrongs that were done by the ancestors of the current regimes. And that's not it. When we look at countries like Iraq and the former president of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, when he passed on, some people celebrated, others grieved. When you look at Libya, when Mr. Kanamama Gaddafi passed on, some people celebrated, others grieved. When you look at Mr. Mugabe, when he was overthrown, some people grieved, others celebrated. It is always something that people question when some of the people who engage in these conversations celebrate instead of reflecting on life, on how things have been done. And I think Uganda now is at a critical moment where we need to have these conversations in a genuine way, genuine manner with each other, so that we can mitigate the seeming vice of tribalism. I think it is important for us to engage in this conversation, and I think there's no better people to start this conversation other than ourselves, who are younger than the liberators of the so-called liberators of Uganda. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask Mr. Julius Mitala to start with the conversation, first by introducing himself. Welcome back, Mr. Mitala. Introduce yourself once again and tell the listeners what you think, what your thoughts are.
Thank you very much, Henry. As always, I'm on the spotlight, but I enjoy the spotlight. I want to make light of some of the suggestions you've made while you've been doing your introduction, especially by introducing Mr. Tony Oleng as a young adult. Same as well, introducing Miss Namata Susan as a young adult. I think I would like to dispute that, because Tony is an engineer. I don't know so much about Susan Namata, but I think if we are sitting on this forum, we can dispute the fact that there is a young adult on this forum. Speaking for myself, I'm over 41 years old, so I am a man. I'm much more older than when Mr. Museveni went to war in 1980. I think he was 27 or something like that. If I'm was it no, he was 47 or something. But I'm 40. I'm 40 plus, so I'm an adult in that respect. Without without digressing into matters of irrelevancy. By way of introduction, Julius Mitala is my name. I prefer to be called Mitala Muzukuru wa Mswangali, which is a recognition of my grandfather, the man who raised me, and the man to whom I owe great respect. I'm a trained lawyer, though I'm not in practice, but I have got full grasp of the law, and I am able to negotiate and discuss matters of the law if it comes to that. I'm very delighted to be back here. It's been quite a while. Lots of things have happened in personal circumstances and across elsewhere. I extend all my condolences to everybody in their different, respects, those who have lost loved ones, and we hope that you find the courage to be able to move past the episode of great personal loss of such a consequence. I hope that during the discourse of this discussion we shall not make the late Eli Tumwine the topic of this discussion. Well, I think the matter we have to discuss goes really far and beyond Eli Tumwine. There are issues that are relevant to his existence as a person and as a central figure, in the liberation war. But I think the issues we have to deliberate on, on this occasion, in my assessment, I think they go far beyond the individual or even individuals, because this is a matter for a national awareness. It's a matter for national conversation in that regard. So, in a nutshell, that's briefly about myself. I'll hand the microphone to my other colleagues to have something to say about themselves as well. Thank you very much, Henry, once again.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mitala Muzukuru wa Mswangali. We do have a lady in the house, and I want to give her an opportunity to introduce herself and, of course, tell us what her thoughts are. Of course, this is not a conversation about the past general, but I think he stimulated my thinking regarding having this conversation and why it might be important for these elders, before they all die off, to initiate once again not war, but a Truth and Reconciliation Commission or conversation. In 1980, they decided to initiate a hot war. In 2022, they have an opportunity to initiate a conversation regarding truth, accountability, and reconciliation. Susan.
Thank you so much, Henry. Thank you for broadcasting this again. I've been missing it, honestly.
Are we losing Namata? Are we losing you already?
Am I on?
Yeah, you're on. You're on, yes.
Am I on?
Your network is not the best, so which is not surprising, given that your network is not the best, which is not surprising, given that you're in Kampala. But after 36 years,
and I'm not using like a mobile. I'm using MTN. So I was saying, nice meeting the engineer, nice meeting the Mr. Council. I'm Susan Namata, a political activist. Henry prefers calling me an economist. I won't dispute that. I agree with Mr. Mitala's argument of not discussing the late general. But then how can we escape the facts? We are in all this because of what these people have done. We can't dispute, we can't underlook the facts. It's real. We have to talk about it. We have to understand why people are behaving the way they are behaving. We have to understand so that we get the solutions, the permanent solutions for people to stop dancing on people's graves. It's not fun, it's disgusting, but we have to discuss these issues so that we find permanent solutions, so that we make sure that we don't see it happen again. We don't see people dying and people starting to celebrate. These people have caused that we can't underlook. So when they die, that's how people perceive their justice, because they seem to think that the seemingly immortals are dying. So they take it as a justice to themselves. So we can't dispute the facts. I know we are not going to discuss him, but we're going to discuss in that line, the line of truth and reconciliation. So I'm happy for this engagement, and I hope we get to understand more of these things. Thank you so much, Henry.
Once again, thank you so much for joining us here today. I know you have been missing it. I have been missing it equally. All right. Engineer Olang, the eloquent youth who wants to make change in Uganda. Your thoughts? What's your name? Your thoughts, and how do you? What's your perception about this conversation?
Thank you very much, Andrew. I hope I'm audible enough for everyone to pick me. I am called Engineer Olanyo Lengetoni, and I must say that besides my profession as an engineer, I very much also have a lot of passion in media, because I know the space and the power that the Fourth Estate holds. But delving much more into the issues of discussion on table today, I want to very much agree that where Uganda is, I very much said this sometimes back when we had a panel, including the likes of Stella Nyanzi here, doctor, and I told you, Andrew, and the panel here that Uganda is just sitting on a time bomb, and it is at the brink of collapse, or perhaps at the brink of bursting. And I told you this at I think we had these discussions at the time when the country was preparing to give a final send-off to the late Speaker Jacob Ulanya, and you had a lot of disparities. These things are not about to stop, and things are not about to begin. They are already in the process. Actually, I've had an argument with, I had an argument over the weekend with the former DP youth leader, Christopher Kidi, and we're arguing about this country. And among the things that we agreed on is the fact is where Uganda has reached. We now need to speak it as it is. The moment we continue to sugarcoat things, it will not make sense. And also, I want to disagree with the fact that people were saying that it is only the Baganda who perhaps demonstrating or perhaps showing their grief and anger when officially General Tumine was announced as a dead person. But of course, you know, the another thing that before we be, just because it's the truth and a truth talk, perhaps. Another thing that I've seen before we even go to the truth talk, there seems to be a lot of fallacy in the secrecy, how the state runs its affairs. I'll tell you this for a fact, as someone who has even said this on this platform, and this one remains on record. I run a TV platform called Nile TV. We have our sources that get for us the news. Now, I will tell you for a fact that Jacob Ulanya, let me start from the story of Jacob Ulanya. Jacob Ulanya was announced dead how many times? Several times. Okay. So they announced today, it is fake news. They announced tomorrow, fake news. Government keeps coming back to say it's fake news. So for the case of Tumini, I had a source that gave us news. I was following in the newsroom WhatsApp group, and the source clearly told us the man is gone. That was the very day that the news came in that evening that the man is gone. And so for us as Nile TV, we trusted our source and we said, okay, if he's gone, he's gone. We put up the story there and said, he's gone. I think that was the only old media house that put it and said, the man is gone. And then we dropped it out there. I even picked a screen grab, dropped it on a few WhatsApp groups, dropped it on my status. A few of the army generals started coming to my inbox. Why are you putting this man? This man is not dead. He's still alive. What? I told them boldly that everything that happens in Uganda happens for the fact of the truth. The only problem that we have in Uganda is that serious things are said in joking ways. Very serious things are taken so jokingly, and at some point the country believes. So I told him we are not retracting our story. What we are aware of is the man is gone. So for as long as you guys are pushing a narrative that is still in Nairobi, Simanyi, this and that, that is public relations. We told them the rest is PR. So we waited until there was official communication by the presidents after some weeks. And we came and pulled back the same story and told them, for us, our story stood and the rest was PR. And that was our argument. And I remember telling guys in NAB, of course, there were issues they were raising. So there's an official person who is supposed to make an announcement. We told them it's okay. That is how it is. But you see where this country has reached. Even the way media has to do its work has to change, because things are not the same way we expect them to be. That is for the case of Tumine. For the case of Jacob, all of you saw what happened. Now, when you see these reactions of people, of Ugandans on social media, I've literally had young people who are from this part of the country and lost people and lost relatives during the 2021 general elections from Kampala. These are actually people, because these people are not only buried in Buganda, by the other interesting fact is we also had dead bodies coming in to Gulu. Okay, we had dead bodies going to my home district in Kitgum. And so one thing I have been telling, and I told Andrea, I said, it doesn't mean if I would align with NRM, I'm going to agree with every rubbish that happens inside that house. No. Perhaps we are trying to develop a new breed and brand of the NRM young people that, yes, accepts, yes, there were good things that the system has done, and that perhaps bad things that need to be told in the face of the system. And that is exactly what we're doing. Let me give you an example. I formally joined the NRM last year. And ever since my time in the NRM, mine has been, if change has been had from the opposition, this time around I have access to meet a minister and tell him point blank that this is wrong, and I will face them, including facing the president. So I have literally developed, and I've been training actually these young people within the NRM to be cautious about how things are done. It's not supposed to be a yes sir thing. I'll give you an example. We have a problem here of the controversies that have always been there. Of course, we have understood as young people who are learned that this is a matter that has been pushed by the deep state. The issue of the Upper Land. Upper Land is the land that is between Achumani and Amoro. That's what they say. Now, this has been a concern and a controversy that has been pushed for all these years. People have been killed severally. So I told these guys in one of the meetings that they invited me, youths from NRM, and I told them, personally, you may not clearly see me every other day in the NRM, because number one, I am not going to be that beggar type who's going to be moved to beg you, because the NRM has created a system of puppets that a young person, or they keep these young people within the system or within the party vulnerable, so that when a leader comes, theirs is to ask for 20,000, 30,000. So I told them that mindset has to change. You guys need to know that you hold a very strong power, that if you say certain things will be done better and work for better generation. So I told them clearly that the only and the biggest problem of Dara Palan is not even General Moses Ali, it's not even any other minister. I clearly told them, and I boldly told them, the problem is President Museveni. Let us, as young people within the NRM, wear our yellow shirts and point at the face of President Museveni as the problem of Palan. The guys agreed. We did a press conference, pointed at the big man as the problem of Palan, because this was a matter of telling it the way it was. So we told the president, you are the problem of Palan. You are at the same time the solution, because you cannot tell us that the soldiers who are killing people in Apa, then you claim they are people from Madi killing their cholis, to create the seemingly of the divide and rule that we learned from primary or secondary, that we now clearly see, because we also did our investigation. We have our facts, we have our evidence. And we told them, if this does not get resolved, then the young people of the NRM are willing to take a more bolder step. So we gave them an ultimatum. And we kept on making demands, of course, obscene demands that you may not even see making sense. And we told them that the president is the problem and he must accept his problem. I'll tell you that this worked in our favors as young people. Number one, when the president came to Actually, I believe he was pressured, or the system was pressured to address that concern. The president made mention on media, if I believe you also, and said the issue of apartheid, he now accepts it as his own problem. Okay? Now, if it were not the young people who took a bold step, wearing yellow shirts, written NRIM with Museveni's badge, and telling him that Museveni, you are the problem of apartheid, I believe up to now, the attacks would have continued. I believe up to now, the silence or the secrecy or the hidden motives of the state would have been shown on the power issue. Of course, people want to know the truth. This is a matter that that has questions pertaining: are there minerals in that land that government wants to push away people minus telling them the truth of what resources they have in that area? So for me, I believe that the issue of truth is a matter that must be taken up boldly. And as a young civic activist, I think young people who are civically cautious must take up this lead role, just like we've taken. And we've created so many pressure groups within the NRM. There are groups that are taking on a power land because the issues are very many. There are groups that are pushing for reparation. There are groups that are talking about government failing to protect people in the LRA war, and they're saying we're taking government to court if they don't compensate people. These are the young people taking up these decisions, by the way. Some of them are in pipeline. And so I'll tell you this. If you see people making noise about a prominent Ugandan who is dead, people are showing grief, people are showing anger because of how the system that was. I remember very well Boy Wine saying that most of these people came in Kampala and they were received with a lot of jubilation. Why are they going down in such a manner? Okay, that means that Uganda needs to be rebuilt. Actually, one of the young leaders I met in Parliament over last week told me that for him, he thinks Uganda should actually first be destroyed and they start building again, because it seems every generation now, this generation has outlived its mandate. The generation of President Museveni and his other comrades, they have outlived their mandate. They have completely lost touch with the population. So, for as long as things continue the way they are continuing, trust me, Uganda is at the brink of war. Uganda is at the brink of genocide. Uganda is at the brink of real chaos. And that is the truth. I'll tell you this. The anger and the growing grief in the public is too much. It is too much. From all sections of Uganda, people are saying that things are not in the right way.
Right. Thank you so much, Engineer Olanyi Oleng. Of course, I let you speak for as long as you wanted, but going forward, let us speak for a maximum of 3 minutes so that we can have a constructive conversation, back and forth conversation. Of course, Florence Musasizi says that she thinks the problem is not Mr. Museveni, but rather the system that we are in. Then you have to ask her a question: who has built that system? Mr. Council, you have heard all the introductory remarks from both Comrade Namata and Comrade Oleng, who actually confesses that he subscribes to the NRM. As a person who lives in the diaspora and as one who proclaims having been a very young kid when Mr. Museveni came to power, what are your thoughts? And if indeed having a Truth and Reconciliation Commission could be the solution to the challenge that Uganda is facing right now, how do we proceed about achieving what we think might be the solution to the problem that we have seen?
Absolutely. Thank you, Henry. And again, thanks to both Susan and Tony for their, eloquent, presentations on these subjects. Tony makes a very interesting question there when he says that they have had him and colleagues within the establishment, they have had the chance as young activists, to have interface with the president, and the president has acknowledged that some of the problems faced with the country are his own making. That is a very interesting observation, because quite often we never see the president acknowledging that he's part and parcel of the problem. So if Tony, as an insider of the system, is telling us that there is a mechanism whereby the president is able to acknowledge, amongst his own team that, he is part and parcel of the problem, I think that's it's a welcome start. You know, that is what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that we are, you know, bringing into the debate here is all about. So then the question for me is Uganda ready for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission or arrangement of that kind? I have to say that, you know, we've had an attempt at Truth and Reconciliation, you know, inquiries before. I think we've had two of them in the past. If I remember my history very well, there was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 1974 to 1975, and that accounted for the period between 1971 to 1974. The report of that inquiry was published in 1975. You know, the criticism, you know, against that report is that it was not a sincere exercise. It was only intended for the regime at the time to shed off, you know, the international pressure, intense international pressure that the regime of President Idi Amin at the time was undergoing because of the various atrocities that had been attributed, you know, to his administration at the time. And obviously, if you go back, you know, into our history, that is one of the most chaotic times of our, you know, Ugandan history. The second time we have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission or inquiry, if you want to put it, is 1986. Got my figures here. I just want to be exact that I'm giving you correct information. That was the period between 1986 to 1985. And that inquiry was meant to cover the whole period from 1962 up to the period of 1986. Now, again, the criticism that has been labeled against that inquiry, the 1986 inquiry, was that it was only intended by the current administration to kind of hoodwink the public. It was a whitewash. It never came to anything. Even its publication, the report has never been made public up to this point in time. So when we talk about truth and reconciliation in this aspect, I think there has to be the willingness. There has to be the political buy-in, the willingness by the political elite, you know, to make sure that we are suggesting something and we are sincere and we are going to be open and transparent, and that we should bring everybody on board, you know, so that we facilitate this national conversation that we are talking about. Are the ingredients right for the Truth and Reconciliation, you know, inquiry? Absolutely. The ingredients, you know, it's without question, you know. In my mind, you know, if you look at the call, the demand for change, it is the most outstanding, obvious kind of element that you can look at and say, you can point at and say that, you know, really the public, our social fabric, the socio-economic, political, you know, setup, people are demanding for a sincere, transparent, and open conversation so that we can be able to heal, you know, the challenges of the past so many years that we've gone through. You know, so yes, there is definitely a need for Truth and Reconciliation inquiry. Whether it can be an effective mechanism of you know, resolving our problems and our challenges, I think for me, I would answer absolutely that it is probably not, because as I've said, we've had an attempt in 1986, and the sincerity of the people, you know, the people who are in charge of this state from 1986 up to present have not, you know, changed very much. We still see the same setup. So the question that one would ask, that if we are not able to look into the findings of the previous exercise, how are we going to be able to look at where we've been and be able to shape, you know, where we are going, when that, you know, overreaching level of suspicion and insincerity still exists within the political structure? So I think that would be my approach in that respect.
And of course, you're posing more questions, which is very important when we are having these kinds of conversation, because when a question is seemingly answered, there seems to be another question that precedes that response or that answer. And now that you are mentioning a very critical ingredient within this conversation, which is to say that if you're going to have this kind of commission, Truth and Reconciliation, should we be having it with the people in power right now who were seemingly still untruthful and not ready to actually establish or start this conversation? But if it's true that these people do not see that the need to have this conversation, then we need to think about ourselves, we need to think about our children, and we need to think about the future of our country. If we do not start this conversation now because of the seeming untruthful people within power, when should we start this conversation? And should we just give up, for example? Stephen says the problem is that crooks and thieves are ruling Uganda, and that cannot continue. It doesn't give how to proceed, besides saying that cannot continue. Susan, your thoughts after listening to Mr. Mitala?
Oh, yes, Henry, thank you so much. First of all, people have a right to truth. People, Ugandans, have a right to truth from their leaders, more especially. So, our leaders in power need to tell us the truth. If we want to move on, if we want to go further, we need to know where we're coming from, and we need to know those things. We need to know the truth. So I think the Truth and Reconciliation Commission should be put. But then again, if we don't go back to the past and see how the commissions that we are set did, or that the commissions that we are set did, I don't think this one will work. For example, the 1986 commission put by the president, His Excellency Museveni, he put a commission to do an inquiry into the violation of human rights by the past regimes. So the inquiry went on, but then the perpetrators were not put out. The perpetrators were not convicted. So the victims never got justice. So if he comes out to do the same this time around, how are we sure that the perpetrators will be put out to book? How are we sure that the victims will get justice? Because he's been known for his character of hoodwinking, putting something out, but then it's just on paper. Practically, it's not there. Secondly, we need this commissioner because the next generation is sitting on a ticking time bomb. Honestly, for us, we can be a little tolerant, but the children we've birthed, the rate of hatred they have, and it's based on tribal sentiments, they won't handle, they won't be tolerant to each other. The Baganda kids who live in Baganda homes, I'm going to be blunt. The Baganda children who live in Baganda homes, they hear the parents complaining day in, day out, complaining of the Munyankole this, Munyankole that, the injustices done by the Munyankole. Earlier, before all this, in the early days, I remember we used to have Banyankole as our bapakasi in our homes. The two kingdoms, the Banyankole and the Baganda. I don't want to go tribal, but then we have no choice. The Banyankole and Baganda used to pay allegiances to their kingdoms, but fully knowing that they have to coexist. So the Banyankole used to live in Uganda peacefully, and the Baganda used to trade with the Banyankole peacefully. But I don't think this thing can happen now. The kind of resentment the Baganda and the Banyankole, not all, I'm not generalizing, some have towards each other, it's a ticking time bomb that can lead us somewhere we don't want. So we particularly need this Truth and Reconciliation Commission for that, to mend the hearts of these children, to rehabilitate them. They grow up hearing a lot of mess. For example, now take an example of the children of the late. How do you think they feel towards the people who openly celebrated or danced on top of their father's grave? Can there be an understanding between those two? I know they are cursing hell So we need this for the children to come. For us, we can be a little tolerant, but these children we've birthed can never be tolerant between this. They've seen the injustices, they've seen the unfairness of the regime. They've seen, for example, let me go to the unemployment of the youth. About 24,000 youths move out of Uganda to look for jobs in the Middle East and other foreign countries. So tell me, because even if it's by merit, they won't get the jobs here in Uganda. The jobs, the procedure of getting a job here in Uganda, everyone knows. It has to be a connection. If you make your research and go to those offices, what you'll find it won't surprise you, because everyone knows. We see on TV. For example, in Masaka, the chief of police is not a Muganda, but it's in Central. I ask myself, isn't there a Uganda policeman that can be a chief of police in Masaka? They are there, but they're not given those chances. So these kinds of injustices are vivid, open. So the children with birth are seeing them. So the moment they will blast, it will be unreturnable. So I agree we need that truth and reconciliation, because first of all, it's our right. But then again, we need to know if it will really be, because reconciliation, I think the perpetrator has to initiate the reconciliation, not the victim. All the victim is looking for is justice. The victim won't come out and say, I need to reconciliate with such and such a person because he did this and so to me. The perpetrator is the one to initiate this. But are the perpetrators of these conflicts, these injustices, ready to initiate the reconciliation commission? That should be the question we are asking. When you hear them talking, these guys they have made it in life. They think they have the power. They are immortals. I don't see them in any way or any day coming down to say that we need to reconcile with these people we've had. I'm not seeing it happen soon. The South Africa issue was different because it was one race against the other. So these people felt cornered at some point in time. And what they had to do is to agree with the commissions, get amnesty for the wrongdoers, and things go on. But here in Uganda, I don't see them getting cornered somewhere because they have the guns, they have the money, they have everything. They know they can compromise with someone who comes up with something. We've seen people being compromised. We've seen people who are strong activists of change go to the other side. So those are my thoughts, Henry. Those are my thoughts.
Right. Thank you so much, Susan. And these are uncomfortable conversations, of course. And I hope the people who are listening to us can see how uncomfortable these conversations are. I think this is just a simple mirror of how a Truth and Reconciliation Commission would look like, first of all. But it's not just truth and reconciliation. There is an aspect of accountability. But I think the way we find out how to build those mechanisms of accountability is by, first of all, understanding what truth are we speaking to? What is the truth that people need to hear? What are there any sort of atrocities that were made or that have happened over the last 36 years since the Liberation War? Because the 1985, the 1986, 1994 Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or that process, at some point it got halted because of lack of finances, which means it probably didn't even complete. So if that was halted because of the lack of finances, to what extent are we going to wait to have a complete Truth and Reconciliation Commission? What are we going to be talking about? What will be the structure of the conversation? Who should be the listeners, the people who actually engage in these conversations? Who listens and writes deliberate reports regarding what happened? What will be the mechanisms of accountability, and how should they be enforced or brought to book? And what are some of the expectations or potential recommendations that would signify reconciliation? And can we get around that table and have these conversations given where we are right now? Engineer Leng.
Thank you, Henry, and I want to appreciate the other panelists for the brilliant submissions and for bringing out areas that are still very uncomfortable but must be told or must be spoken about. I wanted to draw our attention to one aspect. I think there are heroes that we can appraise as of now, people who have actually, in our generation, people we see who are alive, who have tried to do something about truth, about trying to reconcile Ugandans. We all remember at the peak of the death of Jacob Olanya, the chaos and the tribal statements made by the Chief Justice Windolo. We saw a gentleman in the names of Ambassador Olaratunu coming in to initiate a meeting between the Chief Justice Windolo and the Prime Minister of Uganda, Peter Maiga. I believe if that wasn't done, it would have created sort of an imaginable rift between the Baganda and the Acholi. Okay? By all standards, let us agree that the actions done by Mr. Ambassador Olaratunu were very, very significant actions that shape actually what we are looking at as a way, because I think Buganda as an institution in Mengo has actually drawn a very clear line that they are willing to sit with anyone to talk about how we can move as a country. And I think that was a very positive step from the administration of the kingdom. Me as a young person, I saw that as a very key step that actually guides our assemblies as a country. That in a way tells you that yes, there's a possibility that we can sit and talk, okay, about the things that happen in this country. All of us saw that yes, I mean, if you saw the order of precedence, Peter Maiga is by no standards close to Mr. Windolo or Chief Justice Windolo. But when it comes to issues of the truth, Uganda is a country that expects to speak the truth as it is. And another thing that I wanted to also draw your attention to is a platform of Justice Ogola. Justice Ogola has a platform with the likes of Maggie Chigozi, the Elders Forum. That forum, maybe to add on the submissions of council, that forum has also been trying perhaps to have the third attempt on having a truth and justice platform to initiate discussions about the future of Uganda, to initiate discussions about the things that have gone wrong and how best we can correct them. I remember very well as a university leader in Bulu University, that team came, they were doing an institutional move to see that we have these discussions. But of course, I'll also tell you carefully that among the things that, of course, could be government, could be the different funders, we are aware that civil society has been in a very big way stamped on. Okay, DGF funding has been closed in Uganda. Apparently, they're still negotiating for a way to open it. And of course, the discussions, because of the bad political will, there's no goodwill in politics to embrace this, to accept this. So it would have been the best role for the guys in the civil society who can play an oversight in government to take this role up. But of course, we saw civil society funds being closed up, and it has become tricky for organizations like the Elders Forum. I think even in the peak of 2021 elections, they tried to organize a debate, but because of funding, they could not do that. Such debates were very key. You see, it is important to have leaders sit on a round table and point fingers at each other, not doing things in the shadows. And I think that is where Kenya has taken a lead role in pushing that democratic dispensation, because almost everything in Kenya happens in the eyes of the public. Even the legal proceedings you've been seeing in court. Apparently, you compare our legal system. If you saw what is happening in the Supreme Court of Kenya and what happened here when Bobi Wine took the case to court, you saw how the Chief Justice was conducting himself. You saw how a judge who sits in that bench, the lady judge who had a dissenting voice, how she's being treated. Apparently, I'm told she has already been denied her salaries. That is a story in Daily Monitor. Now, there are things that shock you in Uganda. A judge of the Supreme Court being denied her salary because she had a minority judgment on something that she's legally accepted to do within her precincts of the law. Yeah. So there are things that happen in this country and shock you. Actually, we had an agreement with colleagues. These days, I'm very happy that Uganda has young people who are having very cautious discussions. Perhaps we need to widen the scope of this platform. And that's why I wanted to even tell Henry that perhaps these discussions we have here should not stop here. You need to give more platform. You need to widen the scope of this discussion. If at all it was just not scared, you should be doing this discussion at least, just like we see Twitter Spaces, we're doing well, at least on every day with different topics. Because I will tell you this clearly, Henry, I am one young person who has taken time to study the deep state very well. I am one person who can predict that, yes, this might certainly happen, okay? So with my careful studying of the situation, I will clearly tell you that what is happening in Uganda is what we call an imaginable transition. Before you realize, there would be change of government. There's a very fast pace of transition happening, and we're just carrying on problem to the next system. Okay, what is changing might only be administration, but the system runs as it is. So perhaps we also need to widen the scope of this discussion, not only on truth and reconciliation, but the aspect of transitional justice. Because if you look at, I'm a young person who grew up through the wars of northern Uganda. It was the responsibility of the sitting government to take care of me as a young person, to take care of us. So where government failed in its mandate, you'd find up to now, a member of parliament former member of parliament for Gulu municipality, Leandro Komakech, tried to push this private members bill on issues of reparation law. But you see the frustrations they put him through. They actually brought for him someone and they've taken him out of parliament. I met him over last week and he's still pushing for the same thing. Transitional justice, the laws of reparation, truth and justice, reconciliation processes. But I will tell you this, the argument is, why is it that government is taking no interest in trying to make sure that they compensate people who have lost life, property, and have been distanced because of the war? Clearly speaking, economically, northern Uganda could be perhaps 50 years behind the other parts of the country. And that is already an injustice that this government has aided. Because first of all, they did not show goodwill in trying to see that the processes after the post-war situation was handled well. I'll clearly tell you, all of us know how much money was stolen in the office of the Prime Minister in managing post-war, okay? So, to me, I think as of now, the aspects of truth and justice, the aspects of transitional justice, the aspects of reconciliation needs to be held in a process. I would believe a national dialogue of truth should be something that should be initiated. I think also as young people, because I'll speak from the young perspective, that if the elders in this country are failing to start something like a process that we need to be seeing it move, I think young people can take this lead. Trust me, Henry, we are the majority. When they say, I think that the current statistics have been saying young people are actually going to over 81% now. So we can actually direct the flow or how this country moves. It is just because people are a bit lazy. It's because people are a bit discontented, but also the anger and the grief among the population has gotten to a level that people are willing to do anything within their powers. That does not dictate that I'm actually failing to find the difference between a NUP youth person, an NRM youth person, an FDC youth person. You know why? Because all of them can now point at and say, you man, you're wrong. Museveni, you're doing this wrong. And this is something that we should appreciate, that a stage of civic consciousness has been reached for now among the young people. At least the literacy level among the young persons, majority of the young people, also they are played to the disadvantage of the state for failing to take care of the employment situation. Because now people get back home, and when you don't have an employment, you have a degree. The best thing to do is to think through. You now get to be aware of the things that happen around you. You're not comfortable. And you see, that is something that the state has failed to manage. So for me, I would challenge ourselves to start pushing for these things through our very forums. I would believe that these discussions should actually get us to form to have policy papers that we can come up with as panelists here, and things that we can push forward, okay? Things that we can start to advocate for. I think under this very docket is this what we're discussing here falls under the Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Affairs. Chairman Mao has been trying to do something. He has been actually arguing about this thing all through his life in Parliament, in SC5 of Bulu. Now that he has the docket, it is now time for him to prove himself that whatever he has been saying, he can do it. I have not had a chance to discuss with Chairman Mao after him becoming a minister, but I've also had a chance to discuss with people in his circle pertaining the discussions on exactly what we are having to discuss here. And I think let us give him a benefit of doubt that he can do something. But in the event that this year elapses minus seeing progress from that side, I can strongly submit and tell you that for us as young people, we can steer this. And we are not steering it from anywhere. We are steering it right from the inside. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Engineer Olanya Olang. These are important conversations. And they're difficult conversations. They're also uncomfortable conversations. But when we come back, we're gonna go for about a minute. But when we come back, I want my comrade Mitala, who is also a lawyer, to talk about Mr. Mao, Chairman Mao's transition into government right now. As a lawyer, and specifically because he's also still the President General of DP, whose slogan is truth and justice. As Engineer Olanyo Leng says, do you think Chairman Norbert Mao has an opportunity to create what we are yearning for right now as Minister of Justice? Can he become the principal who creates this kind of commission where people will come and talk about their grievances without fear or favor, where we as Ugandans can agree to disagree on certain aspects, on what to talk about during this commission, on some aspects of accounts of accountability, mechanisms of accountability, but also on what reconciliation will look like. I think these are important things to talk about. We can start the conversation now, but I'll give you an opportunity to do that when we come back.
This is the state of the nation. Ibifa Mwanga. We are deliberate, we are reasonable, we are uncensored. The state of the nation with Henry Sully.
Right, welcome back. My name is Henry Sully for the State of the Nation. I want to encourage each and every one of you who is following us to share widely with your colleagues. Encourage other people to come and join this conversation. This is a conversation for all Ugandans, not just the four of us on this panel. So share it widely. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Subscribe and ensure that you don't miss these conversations again. These are important conversations. But they are nothing if you do not join the conversations. Mr. Stephen Bontu, before my colleague comes in, Mr. Stephen Bontu has already started asking questions. He says, what reconciliation when one person is flown to the US at more than $1 million when hospitals have been run down in Uganda? So that is a sound of frustration, of course. The same person also says, what do you mean reconciliation when young people are being traded as slaves? Kidneys are being extracted and these people are dying in the Arab world. What reconciliation when land is being grabbed? I think young people should be straight and say enough is enough. So this young man, I don't know how young he is, but he seems to advocate for the path that 27 people, the initiators of the Freedom Project, initiated in 1980. Miss Florence Musaz says that reconciliation has to be done only. It says that reconciliation has to be done only indigenous, who make 16 states of Uganda. Okay, so the good thing I'm bringing in a lawyer who probably understands these things more legally than I do. So my friend, my colleague, Counsel Mitala. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, very, very interesting stuff here. I think one of the things I want to go back to Susan just a little bit before I even go into that, because Susan was making the suggestion that the reconciliation, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has got to be initiated by the perpetrators. And I think when Susan mentioned that, I think he must have seen me shaking my head, because clearly that cannot be the case. I think so much to that respect, what you'll find, what I can say is that a government will never be willing to pass laws and legislation that jeopardizes their own interests. So if you were if you had to think about a truth and reconciliation kind of inquiry in our current arrangement, most of the crimes that have been committed against the citizenry, they are more or less political crimes. And the perpetrators, they either tend to be people who are very centrally located in this aspects of government and central administration, or they are agents, or people who are very close to power, because they've got interests that they are pursuing, and in the pursuance of those interests, they are inflicting brutal pain to people who are innocent. Sometimes the crime that these people have committed is simply to have a divergent political view, for somebody to say that, okay, I do not support, or I do not like this idea, I prefer the other idea, and that becomes your crime. So these are really political crimes. I think some of the questions we need to be asking about when we even think about this Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I think the thing we need to be thinking about is what is the nature of the reconciliation? What are the issues that we are talking about? Because these are really very important things. I mean, are we talking about violation of the right to food? Are we talking about violations that are associated with torture and inhuman treatment of people, arbitrary, detentions, discriminations, violations of freedom of expression? Are we talking about all those sorts of things, or are we talking about enforced abductions of individuals? What are we talking about really here? Because until we can understand what those issues are, and by the very essence, the nature of truth and reconciliation inquiries, they give the victim, because one of the things is that those kind of arrangements, they lack the adversarial arrangement that we always tend to find in court proceedings, in trials. There's no cross-examination. Nobody is put in the defensive, So the whole idea is that those people who have overseen, supervised these excesses, they really need to they need to have the political will. There has to be the political will for a Truth and Reconciliation inquiry to be effective. The question is that political will present, given the nature of the crimes and atrocities, brutal crimes that have been committed against people? Is that political willingness there? And my view is that, and I'm making this as a general observation, that a government will never pass laws and legislations that jeopardize their own interests. It's never going to happen. So to that effect, who appoints, who puts in place the Truth and Reconciliation? I mean, let's go back to the Truth Commission, the Truth Commission in 1986. You can even pull up the legal notice that created that particular commission and its mandate. What was it to look for? What were the extent of the inquiries that they were carrying out? Its own composition, are the people who are to be appointed on these inquiries, are they people that can be trusted? Because I'm not, to be very honest, for me personally, I am not, I wouldn't be so keen on pursuing this kind of reconciliation, because even in places where they have worked, I'll give you an example of South Africa. They did not solve the problem of they did not solve the South African problem per se. It didn't. In the end, what we are left with is the accusations against Mr. Mandela that he was a he was a washer, he was a sellout. Those questions have still persisted because the South Africans, lots of South Africans feels that justice was never done, especially when you have a situation, because in effect, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, first of all, it's got no powers to punish. All it can do is make recommendation. And I'm not trying to water down, the usefulness of such exercises. But, we have seen numerous commissions that have been set us, even within our own current political structure, whose reports we don't know what were the outcomes of those publications. So the whole element of transparency and the political will, because without the political will, we can initiate 10, 7 Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, and we will always come back to the same point. Because I think the whole point is that we need to be able to look at a process of facilitating an honest national conversation. It can be at a regional level, it can be at a central level, but that conversation has to happen. And in order for that conversation to happen, you have to have a group of people who are willing and committed to these exercises being carried out effectively. When you're looking at a situation like ours, where I can now categorically state that I do not think that we have a functioning government organ in Uganda that works independently. We seem to be a government of presidential directives, and that cannot be a government that functions effectively, because that means that in whichever capacity you find yourself, you'll be vulnerable to a presidential directive. And once a presidential directive is given, it's a presidential directive. How do you walk away from it? Case in point, we've had the case of General Katumba Wamala. He came in parliament and he washed his hands off this whole saga of the Uganda Airlines exercise, saying, look, if you were in my position and you have a presidential directive, what would you do? So we have institutions, we have government operations that cannot work effectively outside the oversight of the president. And I think that's really where our problem sits. Now, obviously, when these institutions are put in place, when these arrangements are put in place, it's not to say that they serve no purpose at all. In fact, they might be very helpful in terms of offering some kind of psychological rehabilitation to traumatized people, to a traumatized group of people. It can offer that, because the exercise allows people to come up, state their case in their own words, in their own understanding, so that the public can get to feel and hear how actually the victim feels about a particular situation. And I think that's the vital exercise. And until we've had an exercise of such a kind, where people can come up and they give an account of the sorts of horrific, horrible things that have happened to them at the hands of individuals, some individuals whom have been identified, and we don't have a system in place, whether it's a judicial system or whether it's an administrative system, whatever, a reparation system, whatever it is, we don't seem to be having a system in place that will look at an individual who has committed crimes against another group of people, whereby society will begin to look at those people as, outsiders and not insiders. So there are all those issues. And I think for me, my position is that I do not undermine.
Do you think that Mr. Mao has an opportunity to start this process, given that he's the President General of DP, which is basically standing on truth and justice? What do you make of his cooperation agreement with the NRM government? And do you think this could be the beginning of a Uganda that could probably start talking to each other instead of talking over each other? Because right now we are talking over each other. We're not really listening to each other.
But in order to answer that question properly, I think you've got to look at Mr. Mao himself. I mean, if he cannot even have a decent conversation within his own house, how is he going to be able to facilitate a national conversation? Because I think if this conversation was to take place, it should have started from in-house. Bring everybody on board, tell them, fill them in on what you are doing, so that you've got the consensus. It doesn't become a one-man show, So this all secrecy, and I think Tony was referring to this earlier on when he referenced, the cases of the late Jacob Olanya, and recently the case of the General. How news had been filtering in through there to the public, and every time news of such a kind has come through, it's been dismissed by the official spokespeople. Only a couple of days later for the news to be confirmed. So there is that lack of sincerity, the lack of transparency, and when you lack that in a national conversation that is meant to foster truth and reconciliation, I do not think that we even stand a chance, of coming up with something, an outcome that is of any benefit whatsoever. Because I think for me, I want to reference really the issue of institutions, because even when you have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, at the end of the day, it will make its recommendations. It might say, okay, we accept this and this happened, these are our findings, and then there has to be a route. There's got to be a pathway. Some people, you talked about the issue of accountability. What is accountability? For certain victims of these excesses, there is no level of compensation you're gonna give them, to when they know that the perpetrators are still out and at large. And by the way, as a matter of fact, many of the people who are responsible for these, very heinous crimes against other individuals, they always occupy, positions of influence, such that even if we had these Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, when you've got the perpetrators wielding such power where they can influence the outcomes and the inquiries of this kind, I truly and honestly believe that, those are not the exercises that are going to yield anything of benefit for us as a community. It's not to say that we shouldn't try it. And as I've been saying, even though government is not going to pass those laws and legislations that will enable such, commissions to function independently and effectively, the wananchi can demand for that. Tony is really referencing that, the people, the civil society organizing, however, in spite of all the difficulties, in spite of all the odds that people are working against, but if there is a clear voice, and I'm saying that there is a voice at the moment that, this hunger for change, is clearly, and we can continue to hide ourselves in the sand like ostriches and pretend, because there is that element of denial. Lots of people are in denial. They don't want to accept that we've got these challenges. We are positioning ourselves as a middle income economy. Everything is okay, but the heart of the country is bleeding. And I think the majority of the people know that things are not okay. And until we come to that conclusion and accept that we've got to calm down, sit together, and pursue a future that is comprehensively inclusive, so that no person is left behind, so that at least even where the courts are not, even where the courts are overwhelmed by the number of cases passing through court, but at least people will be assured that there is a process that they can pursue that will deliver them some form of justice. That's what we need to have.
Very, very interesting insights, and I want to thank you for that. There are a few things that you have mentioned, one of which is very clear, and that people need to pay attention to. We do not have a democratic government anymore in Uganda, but rather a government of presidential directives. That is something that people need to evaluate very closely and see some of the implications of having a government of presidential directives. You also questioned whether there is political will to create such a commission, and indeed what the scope of the commission will look like. you have also mentioned that normally truth and reconciliation commissions do not have the power to implement some of the recommendations that they make. All this trying to show us, or the people who are listening to us right now, that even when we take this route, what is the end goal for having these conversations or these commissions or these inquiries, beyond just giving people space to speak their truth to power, for other people to actually understand some of the how people felt during some of the grievances.
Sorry, Henry. Just very sorry on that. And to expand just on that, I think one of the things that I forgot to mention is that the whole purpose of this truth and reconciliation is, first of all, to examine the past. You know, what has happened? How did we get there? What were the challenges? And how do we ensure that these mistakes do not happen again? Because that is really the essence of it. It's the arousing of the national consciousness, so that as a people we become aware that these are our challenges. This is where we were. This is the journey that we went through. It was traumatic. It was horrific, but we as a people, we now undertake and we confirm that we do not want to go back to that situation. Can we forge a better, cohesive way forward? I mean, those things are well kind of enumerated within our own constitution, actually. And I think we have a very good constitution, but the fact that there's been these changes that have rendered it impossible for presidents to serve for only a limited amount of time. But if you look at the preamble of our constitution, it talks about we, the people, appreciating our history. And that history, is there any Ugandan who doesn't know the history of Uganda from 1962 to the present? And I'm saying here that we had a commission of inquiry, the Truth Commission, in 1986. That was quite very broad. It was looking at the entire period from 1962 to 1986. The only problem we had is that it was not supported. Clearly, there was no will by the those who occupied power at the time to see through this commission successfully. And maybe that explains why the report was never published. Because if we are able to look at that report, then we can be able to reference what were the issues then and what are the issues today. I mean, I do beg you, just for the benefit of those who are viewing and watching us, to have a look at that legal notice of 1986 that created the Truth Commission. You will see it for yourself. The broadness of the inquiry. It talked about all those different violations of the human rights that the nation had gone through, that nobody should ever be held, arbitrarily without detention for going forward. And what happened to that? So it's a lost opportunity. I mean, for me, what I tend to look at in those kind of situations is, like, we always talk about this fundamental change, that dream. I think, we were possibly short-charged for that, because it's a fundamental change that actually never came. What was the anticipation was that there was a change from the usual change of guards, and the change of guards literally meant that we are moving away from a situation of people changing uniforms but remaining intact in their ideology and beliefs, without us moving away from the challenges that we had faced until that point. But if you look, and again, my point of reference is, look at the legal notice that set up the Truth Commission at that point, you will see that the sorts of things that we are talking about today, right today in 2022, these sorts of issues were on the agenda in 1986. What was the missed opportunity? What did we miss? What did we not get at that time? And what stopped that commission from resolving those questions, such that we are here today in 2022, we're still talking about the same issues? So for me, that's what I mean, the lack of the political will, for us to be able to navigate away from that, acrimony. And it's just getting on passed onto generations, and we are digging ourselves deeper into a deeper hole.
Yeah, Susan, we have about 30 minutes. I want us to try and bring together this conversation as it happens. Of course, there's going to be numerous conversations of this nature. But given what we have talked about so far, what are your thoughts? And if there's anyone out there who is watching you, what do you want to tell them in regard to how we should mobilize ourselves to create this conversation to completion in spite of what happened in 1986? Because I think that the 1986, 1994, it collapsed in around 1995 when they were saying there's no money they didn't have money. They didn't have money anymore to complete this process. So why is this conversation important right now? What were the missed opportunities in the past commissions? And who do we engage in these conversations? Florence Musasi said that we should incorporate the 16 states that inscribed on the Parliament of Uganda. Do you have the same thoughts? Unmute yourself.
Well, Henry, thank you so much. Thank you to my fellow panelists. First of all, in this whole issue of truth, it has to be truth, sincerity. But I think it's these people are not sincere. Even if they put these commissions, the truth will still be hidden. They'll just put a facade of something that they think people want to hear or people need to hear, but the real truth will still be hidden. That's why these things never work out. That's why we don't get the real or relevant solutions to the conflicts or to the problems that are brought up the whole issue of reconciliation. I totally think that they just put up a show, they put up a facade. The real truth is left hidden. The real truth is still buried down, because if that truth really comes out, I'm very sure that we can get real solutions. We can get past everything. We can get past everything. We are living in an era where people are so desperate. People are in despair. For example, in Uganda, yesterday there was a video making rounds on social media. A woman beating up I didn't even watch it. I just followed the conversations on different social media platforms. I failed to get the guts to watch that thing. The lady, I read she's 22 years, having 3 babies. So why do you think such a person can hit her own baby like that? A helpless child. It all goes back to governance. We are in a leadership crisis. This lady, the story goes on and on. She was hitting the baby because of water. Governance crisis, leadership crisis. First of all, she's supposed to be in school, 22 years and having 3 babies. She's supposed to be in school. Second of all, the hardships these people go through, the hardships. Maybe she gets water from a very, very deep source in the village. So when the baby spoils it, then it becomes a tug of war. So it all goes back to that. We are in a leadership crisis, and I don't think our leaders seem to understand or seem to know that we are in a leadership crisis. So that's where we won't even get the truth. They won't be sincere with us. So Henry, we are going to stay confused. We are going to stay in a political quagmire. We are going to because if I may suggest, or if I may think, I think these commissions are put up by presidents who passed by leaders after a fallen regime. These commissions to work carefully and closely. I think they are put by a new leader. For example, if Mr. Museveni steps aside and a new leader comes in, that leader is going to put up that Reconciliation and Truth Commission so that he brings people together, the people who are broken, the people who are hurt. I think that's how it's going to work. Like Mr. Mitala was saying, yeah, that's why I said it's a fairy tale. You can't expect a ruling government to put up laws that don't go with their interests. So it's a fairy tale for us to think that at one day this regime is going to commission or to put up an inquiry to put up a real truth, a sincere truth and reconciliation commission. So, like Mr. Olanya was saying, as the youth, we need to come up. We need to tell our leaders enough is enough. Like Dr. Stella always says that we need a system overhaul. We need to put systems that are going to protect us from ourselves. We are in this because of the systems. The systems are no longer protecting us. We are under presidential directives. When he directs do this, they do that. When he directs do that, they do that. We are no longer under a system, under an organized system that can help us, that can protect us from ourselves. So that's what I think, Henry.
Yeah, engineer, there's a lot that has been said. Your responses, how do we move forward beyond these conversations? Because the conversation was here because they have been talking a lot about liberation. Everyone talks about liberation, and that's how the 27 became very important, because apparently they were the initiators of the peace project. As the peace project failed, and how do we proceed beyond liberation, beyond conversation, beyond slogans that say that leave issues of the generals to the generals, because that's how people have become arrogant. Like when there's an issue to talk about, engineer, you're not supposed to say anything because you're not a general. So don't talk about things that happened in 1984, 85. You're not a general. You leave issues of the generals to the generals. General Engineer Oleng, what do you guys, what do you generals talk about, and who should engage in these conversations?
I must say I've enjoyed this entire panel, because everything that we've discussed here relates to what happens within the common discussions on the streets of Gulu, on the streets of the towns that we move in. And among the most interesting discussions a gentleman made was, and this was a former member of parliament of, I think he stopped in 2006, and we're having an argument, and he said, Uganda is actually not fit to be a state. We're actually fit to be called a WhatsApp group that has an administrator who can remove you at any time. That is sarcastically to respond and agree with what Council Mitala said. You know, the issue of directives comes in, yes. And this, you cannot blame it on people like General Katumba Wamala, because the president has a lot of powers and mandates within the constitution. That, as a lawyer, he knows that the current constitution gives a lot of powers to the president. If at all you are not aware, you could look through the roles and responsibilities of the president and its power, you'd be shocked that almost everything in this country is derived from the presidency. So for you to blame the system without blaming the president, then you're joking. So entirely the president has every mandate overall. So for me, I think with old age, you see, for me, I've been trying to look at where the issues are, and everything seems to be going back to the old man from Rwakitura. I've been trying to narrow these things slowly. And for me, I want to agree that with old age, President Museveni is beginning to realize, yes, that there must be a Uganda, and there is certainly going to be Uganda after me. Okay? It's not going to be far. I don't think President Museveni is going to be in power for the next 20 years, 10, 20 years, perhaps, or even 5. there is definitely a situation whereby we shall have a Uganda without President Museveni. And I think as an elder, with age, he's getting to be honest a bit. I'm speaking this because it was unique, even for us who are pushing for the issue of APA, for President Museveni to accept that yes, it is me who is the problem. However much we still don't see a lot of push and will to ensure that besides the political statements of accepting this problem, actions being taken. Yes, that is already a step, because having a military background is one thing and then having a civilian background is another. And so the way we perceive and reason out things would be different. I want to believe that President Museveni, before picking ambitions to be president, he knew what he wanted to do. And so if you've been following history of Uganda, this gentleman has been very, very consistently in studying how all these past leaders were running their affairs. At some point, he was a minister of state for defense. So he was in charge of defense of the country. He knows where and how things were being done. Okay? So I want to believe that entirely all these processes, of course, that is the first step. I would believe that it is still rests on the president. Number two, I would want to believe that if in the event that people that have mandates like Chairman Mao or President General Mao of the Democratic Party, now in their authority as Minister of Justice, fail to put up this kind of commissions and platforms for discussions on the future of Uganda, I think it will be upon us to see how we hold them accountable. At least for the record, I want to tell you this, for the record, at least for the record, I think it was on Friday. It was on Friday that Chairman Mao and I remember seeing Chairman Mao. I saw a number of youth leaders. They were invited in Parliament and they were having a discussion on exactly what we're trying to discuss about. So perhaps I think there are initiations from within government also to start these processes. But I think as leaders or as citizens of this country, we do not need to wait for these guys to come up with these benchmarks and say, this is what we're going to use as a yardstick for this discussion. We should also create our own yardsticks and say, as young persons of Uganda, this is what we demand for. This is the discussion that we want, that young persons in Uganda, this is what we think should be discussed about. Because Uganda has to be treated in a very special way. The disparities or the injustices meted on people in Uganda may not necessarily to 100% be the same that people from the North faced. So we need to treat this cautiously, okay? The war that brought this government to power was majorly done and around Luero, not so, if I could remember the history well. That's what they talk about, the Luero Triangle War and all that. So that means the people there, I believe, have not even gotten compensation. Of course, I see there's a whole minister for Luero something affairs, just like we have minister for Northern Uganda affairs, minister for Karamoja and all that. Of course, those regions that are being treated as special interest groups, you will find there was even no need of putting a minister who does not even have a mandate to do something. So I think areas like that deserve a lot to be handled in terms of accountability, what government did, the atrocities that were done by government, it should be compensated, and these discussions cannot be gotten into when demands are not made right. I have not clearly seen serious demands from people of Luero. As well, there's also been no clear demands from the people of Acholi land or for any other region that has had specific issues for their area. And so I think it's also right now that the country seems to be in a transition. The problems that we're having currently as a country are our problems as a country, not the problems of NRM. FDC shares the same problem, the same with the NUP and all these political entities. Political leaders need to tone down their ego and need to start addressing the concerns of Ugandans as they are. I was trying to argue with a few friends, and I tried to share this with Henry Sally. I said, some of the political leaders have gotten positions and are now comfortable. They are not making demands about what they've promised citizens that they'll do. This is cross-cutting, both within NRM, opposition, and all through. And you've seen right from how Parliament is conducting its business. Parliament has become a whole shadow of unfortunately, Jacob passed on, but I believe Jacob Alanya would have brought a serious parliament. Now we see a mediocre kind of parliament that MPs have to be begged to attend sittings. Members of parliament cannot literally make statements in English for 2 sentences. So it's a whole joke that we find people in charge of this country who do not actually know what they're doing. Okay? We find a whole leader of government business parading or conducting themselves in ways that you feel make this country a whole joke. I have really taken interest in trying to compare Uganda and Kenya, and it hurts me as a citizen of this country who holds a citizenship of this country, that my country is not really serious about things that happen. So that's why I developed the saying and say, almost everything in Uganda happens in very many serious ways, but are taken in the most joking manner, including deaths of people, okay? But I'm also happy that there are people in this country who still have the gift, the energy and the guts to speak the truth, okay? That notwithstanding, I think the issues of not speaking the truth or the issues of hiding out things has taken us down as a country, because things like corruption are because leaders fear to speak about the truth. And this does not stop on only citizens being advised to do whistleblowing. No. The president, in so many ways, has contained corrupt officials, okay, who have been exposed. The president who appoints an IGG tells the IGG, madam, please do not cross that line. There's a line that I have for you. But this lady was doing her work. So we find there's a lot of cover up in this country. And so if we're going to have a discussion, President Museveni may not be interested in the discussion, but we need to make demands and tell him we need him to leave a Uganda that should work for everyone. I am not interested in hearing that President Museveni has given power to another person and everyone is running. Everyone is on the first flight. Everyone is looking for where their passports are. And that's the direction we are in as a country now. As a country now, in the event that there's a power change, as of now, Henry Sally, as of now, I will be calling you, telling you maybe I'm in Kenya, maybe I'm in South Sudan. That is the truth. And in Council Mitala, I'm very much aware that every day you stay, you have some money on you, emergency, that anything happens, I can pick my passport and sweep, you run. And that is where Uganda is. This discussion we were having here is very uncomfortable, but very many Ugandans agree with us. The only problem is not very many have the urge to speak about these things, because you fear that they might pick you, fear that this might happen to you. But also one thing I've learned, that people who cowardize, what I mean by this is you start to speak today, then tomorrow you stop, are the people who get in trouble. But when you speak, the public gets to be your defense line. I'll tell you for a fact, I have no concern or problem to tell President Museveni that you've done this wrong. And I've told him severally, when we've actually met, I've had the opportunity to meet him, and I've told him, this is not right. You've actually made a problem, because you cannot tell me that why are young people hating you. You've created that shift that entirely there is no touch between you and the young people of this country. Issues of unemployment is not a talk that we can have. It is just a practical scenario. Issues of how people are given jobs, on issues of names. I'll give you an example. This is on personal arrangement. I applied for a job. I did a very diverse course. I went through, did everything. Now, I think I even passed the interview very well. I think was shortlisted. They needed 3 people. We're only 4 who applied. The other gentleman did not have the qualification fully. So 2 of us were clearly shortlisted, and by all standards, at least the 2 people were supposed to be given the job, and then they look for another person. But let me tell you, the whole director of an entire government parastate called me and said, just because your name begins with an O, this job is not meant for you. This was just last week. And so that also tells us where this country is. I might look brown. Actually, wow. The gentleman made statements and said, just because I think you were looking brown, tall, and they felt like you were from a different part of the country. And so when it comes to issues of looking through your documents and all that, because, man, I will tell you this. When I appeared before that bench for that interview, I was handled well, did the interview, everything looked okay, And it has given me a reality of this country. And I want to agree that certain things need to be changed, because if I am to pick this as me and say, okay, fine, I'm going to teach my child this, I'm going to tell my circle this, the multiplier effect will be something not far from a genocide in this country. And that is where President Museveni needs to sort this mess, because he could have created the mess, or he could have found the mess here and has allowed the mess to proceed. The system or the mandate will fall on him because he is legally existing as a president of this country. So he needs to take that responsibility as a leader. I am happy that at this old age, President Museveni is getting to be more sincere and more sincere. Perhaps if you've been following him closely, you will agree with me how he's behaving. But that does not stop the fact that we should stop to make demands. The demands as citizens must be done. Of course, the biggest problem we have as Uganda, which I've seen as a disparity between us and Kenya, is the fact that Uganda does not have a properly civic-oriented citizenship. That means citizens in this country do not understand their rights. They do not understand what they're supposed to do. They are just there as citizens. Ugandans, majority of us, are in a state of hopelessness. They do not have hope. That's why if something happens, they say, okay, this is Uganda. After all, this is Uganda. But
Uganda,
also, this, you lastly, as my last line of statement, you said, what are we doing as generals? The issue of generals making careless statements and saying, leave issues with the generals to the generals. I think, for the example of General Eli Tumwine, we all saw how leaving issues of the generals to the generals affected him and his family. Perhaps he is not feeling the impact, but the children who are my age mates, the children who are in our class of society, have the problem. Now, the trauma that the family is dealing with, they're going to live with it. The trauma that your father who you saw fighting for this country, perhaps, has all the money, has all the resources to protect you as a family, cannot protect you from the anger and grief of over 35 million Ugandans. And that is where every general or every government official who makes a careless statement, it goes back to you personally and privately. And so as a country, as citizens or as leaders serving this country, humility is the story that, or the lesson that we all need to pick. Humility. All of us have to be humble. Yeah.
Very, very interesting. The generals might have the guns, but they cannot protect their families from the anger of 35, 40 million Ugandans. We're almost done. In 1 minute each, let us wrap up this conversation, and perhaps I can get some insights on what we should be talking about in the preceding conversations or in the following conversations. Mr. Mitala, you've been shaking your head throughout General Lang's conversation or deliverance. Why and what should we do in the next 60 seconds?
I can see why lots of young people are at risk. They're actually vulnerable of being, misled into the politics of Mr. Museveni. He's a very interesting person. He's a very, very charming, and even in his old age, he's clearly not lost that charm, to be honest. And if you are not very careful and very alert, it's very easy to fall, for all that, fluffy bit about him. In regards to the president wielding too much power under the constitution, I may not necessarily disagree with that statement, but I also am very much aware that there are so many other, constitutions all over the world that, confer quite a lot of power on the sitting president. But I think it takes an element of patriotism, pure patriotism. And when you talk about patriotism, you're talking about people who really have the love for the nation, love for their people, and they really care about their legacies. Lots of leaders across the globe, they have been very careful and very attentive to that intuition, to the effect that they clearly realized that they had a role to play in the national building, and as soon as their role had been accomplished, they were able to hand over the stick to the next person and be able to carry forward. We don't have to look very far to see examples of such a kind. We have very close to home, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere. If you look at his legacy, very humbly, with a lot of humility, bow down to his people and say to them, look, guys, I accept there are certain things that have not gone wrong, but I'm not going to be here forever. And for that matter, I'm handing over the mantles to another person so that we can be able to construct, a future that brings everybody, across. And that's not to say that the Tanzanian, state of affairs doesn't have its own problems, but I think by and large, one would say that is quite, a little bit better than ours, where we have this, one-man system, in every corner of the chair, every corner of the house, you can just see just one person there. And I think that's, for me, that I find that very uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable with me. Very quickly on this question of whether Uganda is ripe for a commission of Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I think we are expecting too much from Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. Clearly, they don't have the power to punish. They can make recommendations, but those recommendations, without the political will, and very well knowing that majority of the people who are responsible for crimes against humanity, they occupy very serious government places and they wield a lot of power. Those commissions, you can look across the globe and tell me one commission which has been effective in resolving a country's particular problems, with the exception of maybe Mozambique and another country. But I'll end it at that point. Thank you very much, Henry. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mitala. Susan, in 1 minute, wrap up this conversation.
I would urge, if that time for truth and reconciliation comes, if any day, that day comes when we have to have that truth and reconciliation, I would urge the people, the parties involved in it, to be sincere, to tell the truth, to make sure the perpetrators, for the first time, let us learn from history. For the first time, let us learn from history so that we get a new form of a country, a new form which is a country which is fair. So I would urge whoever is involved in this Truth and Commission, when the time comes, to be sincere, to dig up the dirt, to bring up everything that has hurt Ugandans, to bring out the perpetrators, to be brought to book, to be punished, to be given amnesty if it's possible, to reconcile with the victims, to pay them back.
All right.
To apologize. Yeah. Because that's what will make our country go further. That's what, and also, if we are to do all that, we need a system overhaul. The fact still remains that we need a system overhaul. We need a system that works on merit. We need a system that is fair and just. When we don't have those things set, we shall always be coming back to ground zero. We shall always be coming back to the mistakes of our forefathers. So thanks so much, Henry, for hosting us again. I hope we meet next Sunday. This conversation still needs to be expounded on. So you can still bring it up next Sunday with other new faces, with other new ideas. People have very many ideas in their heads. They just don't have space to air them out. Thank you so much, Council Mitala. Thank you so much, the engineer Olanya. Thank you, Henry, once again.
Thank you so much, Susan, for those insights. Engineer Olanya, first of all, I'm really sorry, terribly sorry that you are facing discrimination, despite having passed your interviews. I hope that day will come when people will be judged based on the content of their character rather than their tribe or name. Initial beginning, their names. How do we wrap up this conversation?
I still very much strongly contend that Ugandans and leaders of this country need to accept that where we have reached is a tipping point, and we need to sit. There's need, and a very urgent need at that, have a very honest discussion pertaining the future of this country. That withstanding or notwithstanding, if leaders are not showing political will to start that up, I think citizens can take that lead and make those demands. Whether the results of those demands are going to be positive or negative is a discussion we can keep having when the process has begun. The most important thing is for us to start those discussions. And for me as a young person, I think those discussions can start at even one-on-one level. And of course, it can be furthered. Because trust me, it has financial implication, I'm aware. And I think the easier ways of doing it could even be perhaps, as young people, actually saying, yes, as youth leaders of Acholi or as young, cautious leaders from Acholi sub-region, we want to go and meet young leaders from Uganda and discuss on the issues of this country. Perhaps it can be in that kind of rotational manner for the start, because there needs to be a start. There needs to be a goal. I will not agree with Councillor Mitala for us to be in that state of having no hope. We need to have something as a basis of starting. I am aware that there is no political goodwill, but there are also success stories all over the world that demands have been made and perhaps things can get better. We must have hope at all costs. I know so much has been done that deprived citizens of even having hope, and everyone says, okay, after all, this is Uganda. But let's remain hopeful, and I want to appreciate you, Henry, and appreciate the University of Toronto for supporting this initiative. And I would love, in my recommendation, that perhaps also try to engage the persons of Democratic President General Manobat Mao and Leandro Komakaj, because those are two people that I have clearly identified as head leads in this initiative. So it would be very good to have them. This discussion is a very interesting discussion that, as Council has said, that should be furthered. But as well, do not only have people like us who are activists or advocates, have people in line with authority, so that when you're asking for these accountability questions, there are people with authority who can respond to them, because some of us may not respond to these things. So I think that is what I would advise. And I believe they're willing to come on board here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Engineer Leng. You are challenging us, you are challenging the state of the nation to invite people with authority. But it's the same space within which a declaration has been made that we are dealing with a government of directives, presidential directives. So I'm not sure if you're asking me to bring the president here to.
No, I'm saying personally, like Norbert Mao can be brought here. They will not refuse.
I know that Norbert Mao could tell us that he received a directive from the president not to engage in any other thing. Anyway, these are conversations. They are, like we have said earlier, these are tough conversations. They are uncomfortable conversations, but they are conversations that we must have. I want to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you who has joined us here today. We are excited to be back. We are going to have these conversations as we go into the fall and the winter. Of course, we're going to be so much indoors. So if I'm not in the library, I'll probably be here trying to have these conversations with you. I want to take this opportunity to thank the University of Toronto affinity groups for sponsoring some of these conversations and for appreciating that free speech, space for free speech is important within our midst. It's a privilege for us to have these conversations. Again, thank you so much for joining us here today. And I wish you a great weekend.
This is the state of the nation. Irifa Mugwanga. We are deliberate, we are reasonable, we are uncensored. The state of the nation with Henry Salu.